Today we are going to discuss the nicest guy in psychology, Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers is the founder of client-centered therapy. He played a large role in the furthering of humanistic psychology and developed the theory of personality development. In 1902, in Oak Park, Illinois, Dr. Carl R. Rogers was born. In 1924, he received his B.A. from the University of Wisconsin, and in 1928, he got his Ph.D. in psychotherapy from Columbia University. Carl Rogers has written many books and over 100 publications on the theory of personality development. Together, we will review documents written by Carl Rogers to better understand the foundations of person-centered approach, the conditions of therapeutic personality change, and we will also be given a lesson in active listening. This is where we get to the exciting stuff. I'm Gloria, a recent divorcee, struggling to find the balance between being a new single girl on the prowl and being a mother. I'm one of Dr. Rogers' patients, and I'm going to tell you how Carl Rogers' person-centered approach changed my life and how it can make you a better person too. Rogers had become increasingly frustrated with current methods of therapy. He disliked psychoanalytic, experimental, and behavioral therapy because he believed that they inhibited clients from reaching self-actualization, which Rogers felt was the highest level of being. But through his frustration, he was able to develop a brand new idea. He developed person-centered therapy. Carl Rogers' hypothesis of person-centered therapy is the following. It is that the individual has within him or herself vast resources for self-understanding, for altering the self-concept basic attitudes, and his or herself's directed behavior, and that these resources can be tapped if only a definable climate of facilitative psychological attitudes can be provided. Carl Rogers created 3 conditions which enable the client to go through therapy. The first condition is congruence. This means that the therapist must be himself and be honest with the client. Carl Rogers believed that therapy would not promote growth unless the therapist was transparent with the client. That the therapist should be honest with the emotions that he is feeling in the moment. Only while doing this will the client feel truly comfortable. The second condition that is necessary is climate. It is important that the therapist create an environment of unconditional positive regard. In order to create this environment, the therapist must allow the client to express him or herself without judgment and accept and appreciate the client as they are. The third condition is empathetic understanding. This means that the therapist must make an effort to fully comprehend the emotions and experiences of the client. If the therapist is unsure of how the client is feeling, he or she should probe and question until he or she is able to grasp a greater understanding. Carl Rogers will now explain what happens in therapy when all 3 of the conditions are met.
Well, suppose I am fortunate and that I do experience some of these attitudes in the relationship. What then? Well, then a variety of things are likely to happen, both from my clinical experience and from our research investigations. We find that if attitudes of the sort that I've described are present, then quite a number of things will happen. She'll explore some of her feelings and attitudes more deeply. She's likely to discover some hidden aspects of herself that she wasn't aware of previously. Feeling herself prized by me, it's quite possible she'll come to prize herself more.
Carl Rogers identified several elements which will constitute beneficial personality change if they are done completely and over an extended period of time. The first step is that the therapist and client meet for the purpose of psychological help. The client should meet the therapist in a state of incongruence. This means that there is an inconsistency between the experiences the client is dealing with and his or her self-perception. This inconsistency leads the client to become anxious or feel invalidated. The therapist should be genuine throughout the entire session. This refers to the congruence condition discussed earlier. Essentially, it means that the therapist must be himself and be honest with the client. The therapist should maintain unconditional positive regard for the client throughout the entire session. The therapist should also engage in empathetic understanding. The final element is that the client should only have a small sense of therapist empathy and unconditional positive regard. You don't want to freak the client out. Along with these elements, Carl Rogers felt that the only way to bring about lasting change in people was to be an active listener. He advocated active listening not only in the therapeutic sense, but also in everyday life. He felt that listening enables an individual to have a deeper relationship with others and provides a means for growth. Carl Rogers felt that listening was a skill that needed to be learned and could be perfected. But before one could begin to learn how to listen actively, they had to become aware of what things they should avoid. The first thing to avoid when learning how to become an active listener is the desire to get others to agree with you. It is not the job of the listener to correct or direct the client or friend. The second thing to avoid is agreeing or disagreeing with the client or friend. As a listener, you are more of a sounding board. The listener's opinion is not necessary nor valid in these circumstances. It is important that the client and friend feels safe when speaking to the listener and that he or she does not feel like the listener is passing judgment on them. It is important to note that sometimes encouragement is not necessarily helpful. Carl Rogers makes the notion that telling someone who is very upset, "I'm sure everything will be okay," sort of demeans or invalidates their emotions. So, now I'm sure you're wondering, how does one become an active listener then? One should listen for total meaning. What does this mean? Well, this means that you must not only listen to the context of the message, but also be aware of the underlying meaning. You need to become a sensitive listener and devote yourself to the client or friend. One must also respond to the feelings of the message. For example, if your roommate came back and said, "I would like to burn my history and systems textbook," it would be easy to respond to the content, but the actual feeling of despise towards philosophy may require some empathy on the listener's part. It is also important to notice all communication cues, both verbal and nonverbal. The speaker's words are not going to be able to communicate everything the client or friend would like to say. Think about when your significant other says, "I'm fine." Do they ever really mean it? Well, I hope now all of you will try to be more active listeners in the future. We will now watch a short therapy session with Dr. Carl Rogers. The therapy session is between me and Dr. Rogers. As I am sure you all remember, I'm a recent divorcee trying to balance my sexuality with motherhood. In this clip, you will see Dr. Rogers apply the 3 conditions of person-centered therapy discussed earlier, as well as the 6 elements of psychotherapeutic change, and you will see Dr. Rogers engaging in active listening. Enjoy!
And somehow, sometimes you kind of feel like blaming them for the feelings you have. I mean, why should they cut you off from a normal sex life?
Well, a sex life, I could say, not normal, because there is something about me that says that's not very healthy to just go into sex because you feel physically attractive or something, or a physical need. So something about it tells me that's not quite right anyway.
So to feel really that at times you are acting in ways that are not in accord with your own inner standards.
Right.